And now to our program, and here to present cybersecurity risk management in the 21st century, gives me a great pleasure to introduce Sean Walls. He is Vice President for Eurofins Cybersecurity North America, which is a multi-billion-dollar international QA, digital testing, and cybersecurity organization. Sean has over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity and information technology. He has held executive leadership positions with several national security consulting and IT integration companies, and he has built cybersecurity divisions for two separate multi-billion-dollar international companies. He serves as a strategic advisor for hundreds of Fortune 500 and 100 companies, and he is a frequent speaker nationally on cybersecurity issues. Please welcome Sean Walls.
Thank you, Sue. That guy sounds impressive. So let me just start by thanking everybody for being here and for the PA Chamber for inviting me to speak this morning. Cybersecurity is a passion of mine. As a matter of fact, it's more that I live and breathe and sleep cybersecurity and have for more than 15 years. I remember back in the 70s, and this is going to date me a little bit, but my mother, she worked for one of the largest pulp and paper companies in Canada, and she was a data entry clerk, and I remember her talking about technology and prophesying to me about what was coming down, as far as technology was concerned. She would tell me that our TVs are going to be our interface to the world. We're going to get our mail through our TV, and we're going to interface with each other and make phone calls through our TVs. We're going to buy stuff through our TV. This was before personal computers were even, a concept, really. And it captured my imagination. It made me think of the potential of where this world's going and what the future is going to hold. And from that point, I fell in love with technology. And I've had the privilege since then to work in the field, to consult with Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies, build data centers, build security architectures, build security programs for large international and national companies. And it's a privilege to be able to do that, because I think that cybersecurity is the vehicle that's going to take us from where we are today to where we're going to be in about 10 or 15 years. We are entering an age of an absolute explosion in technology and innovation. Who would agree with that? Okay, not everybody. That's interesting. So right now, there are so many technologies that are emerging at the exact same time, cross-pollinating with each other. The race to market is not measured in decades anymore, it's measured in months, sometimes even weeks. And we have things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality, and augmented reality, and quantum computers. We have blockchain and cloud computing and 3D printing and all these things that are coming together all at the same time that need cybersecurity, or it's going to be a very bumpy ride between now and in the next 10 or so years. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what it's going to require for us to get there, to do it in a way that empowers us, lets us leverage the blessings of this technology that we're about to use and adopt. So before I get started, I might as well just talk a little bit about who I am and who I work for. Anybody heard of Eurofins? So we have a few people, people that I know, so it's nice to see some familiar faces. By the way, we're filming this because I really want to make sure that we take this message and we push it out and educate other folks, and other people can benefit from this. Actually kind of makes me, that's loud, kind of makes me wish that I had kept my New Year's resolution to lose a few pounds, but that's fine, that's all about me. So I have the opportunity and the privilege and the honor to be the Vice President for Cybersecurity for Eurofins. Has anybody heard of Lancaster Labs? Okay, so Lancaster Labs is actually one of the largest employers in the area. We employ about 2,000 people in the Lancaster area, greater Lancaster area. But Eurofins is essentially, like Sue said, a digital testing, a quality assurance and standards testing. So if you flip your laptop over or your phone around or your TV and you look at those UL and IEEE stamps on the back, well, we probably had something to do with testing that, making sure that that those manufacturers were adhering to certain standards. But we also test agricultural products, food products, biopharma, environmental, As a matter of fact, that big hurricane that dislodged that rig in the Gulf, remember that about 10 years ago, maybe? And that huge oil spill that took place? Well, all that testing, all the environmental testing of the water and the air and the sand and everything, that was all sent back here for testing. And we were responsible for that. But we also do cybersecurity work. So let me just tell you a little bit about some statistics for Eurofins. We're a fairly large company. We're pushing around 50,000 employees globally now. We have 550 locations. We have a presence in 45 countries. We do work globally, though. So I don't think there's a country that we don't touch or have customers in. We work for some of the largest companies in the world, and we're one of the fastest growing companies in the world. We're traded on the Paris Stock Exchange. And if you take a look at our performance over the past 20 years, we've outperformed notable companies like Google and Facebook. I wouldn't say Amazon, but we're close. And so we're an incredibly stable and fast-growing company, and we've broken into this digital testing space in the last 10 or 15 years because it's an emerging market that we really want to, we want to help our customers secure the products that they're creating as well as the businesses that they're growing. So from a cybersecurity perspective, we offer the full spectrum of cybersecurity services. So your assessments, so if you're gauging the security posture of your organization, if you want to test, measure risk, identify the vulnerabilities that you have, and develop a strategy for addressing and for remediating those, then we can help you with risk assessments, penetration tests, application testing. From a compliance perspective, we pretty much do it all. Whether it's the GDPR, GLBA, HIPAA, PCI, SOC 2, you name it. If you're having challenges there, you're looking how to manage that more effectively, we can help you there. And on the program development, I call it program development, it's really advisory services. Anything from writing policies to developing programs like disaster recovery, business continuity, incident response, security awareness, training, those kinds of things, right up to aligning with ISO 27001 or COBIT or ITIL or the NIST cybersecurity framework or any of the standard frameworks that are out there. You guys are quiet. Come on, wake up. I know it's early. How do you think I feel? So you're not here to hear about Eurofins. You're here to hear about how we can manage security moving forward. I'm kind of a techno geek. This talk's not going to be super technical, but I do like to look at what's happening in the world, the emerging technologies that we're seeing on the horizon, and how that's going to impact our world. And I really think that in the next 10 years, our world is going to change beyond recognition. Absolutely change beyond our. If you think the internet's changed your life in the last 20 years, you just wait for the next 5 or 10 years. As a matter of fact, we live in incredibly interesting times. There's an ancient Chinese quote. It's actually a curse. It says, "May you live in interesting times," or "Cursed is the man that lives in interesting times." And you might think, well, we live in interesting times. It's not so bad. I kind of like it. All these cool gadgets. But in ancient times, interesting times were wrought with suffering. It usually meant that there was a famine or a war or political upheaval or some kind of rapid change that people couldn't keep up with, and it caused suffering. Well, that's what we're heading into right now. There's going to be more than, well, depending on what statistic you look at, between 100 and 200 billion connected devices. We're going to have a demo here in about an hour that's going to demonstrate how you can hack into things. In this room here, if I was to scan this room, there's probably half a dozen things in this room or on this floor that I could hack into. So when it comes to the connected world, you go back 10 or 15 years, what were we protecting? What was our attack surface? It was a little sliver through our firewall. You might be protecting your web server, your email server. You had ports 80, maybe 25, 110, maybe 21, 23. That was about it. You had a couple servers in the DMZ, and if you were not that sophisticated, you might have just statically natted that right into your internal network. And that's all you had to protect, maybe your endpoints and some viruses. So the 1990s mentality of antivirus and firewalls is really not going to translate into today's world. The 1990 mentality is not going to translate into the 20-teens or the 2020 reality that we live in. When you're planning to secure your environment, you got to think about the entire attack surface. Is that too loud for you guys? Should I turn it down? Put it down here. Can you still hear me? So you got to think of the entire attack surface. You got to think about all of your assets. The attack surface now is in our cars, it's in our homes, it's in our HVAC systems, it's in our alarm systems, it's in our back pockets, it's in our planes, it's in our medical devices. The attack surface is pretty much everywhere. It's permeated and saturated every aspect of life and business, and it's only going to get worse. We have a partner. I'll keep names anonymous for security reasons, but we have a partner that we installed their product in a casino, large casino, and they had a giant fish tank in the middle. And when we put it in there, it detected almost immediately that somebody had hacked into the little device that was floating inside this giant tank that was almost the size of this room. But the little device that was checking salinity and feeding the fish and doing some automated things, nobody had bothered to change the default password on that. They just hooked it up to the Wi-Fi and just left it alone. Somebody had hacked into that and had actually done, from there, hacked into their point of sale system and was exfiltrating information about high rollers and various customers that they had. That's an example of the world we're heading into. So when you think about security, you need to think about this expanding and growing attack surface and all the critical assets that you have. Couple that with the changing threat landscape. If you go back again 10 or 15 years, what did we deal with? We dealt with script kiddies. Everybody knows what a script kiddie is? Yeah, I see some nods. I wouldn't say kids, but people that were interested in notoriety, trying to hack in websites so they could deface them and they can gain a name for themselves. Today, we're dealing with organized crime. We're dealing with cyber warfare, real state to state. There's actually a war going on. Are you guys aware of the fact that there's a full-blown, almost World War III that's going on, and nobody talks about it? It's in cyberspace, but it's happening. As a matter of fact, while we're recording this, I'll just say that in my opinion, that there are people from various countries around the world, and I won't say who, that have infiltrated our critical infrastructure and are sitting there waiting for a conventional war to be declared, and boom, instantly we'll take down our electric grid, or play with our stock market, or negatively affect our critical infrastructure, emergency response, and those kinds of things. What would happen if we lost electricity right now? If the entire Northeast just lost electricity? We'd be catapulted back to the Stone Age, right? So the attacks are changing. We got organized crime. We've got ransomware. 5 years ago, ransomware wasn't even a thing, right? But now it's one of the biggest threats. What's the number one threat to any organization? I'm gonna get you guys engaged. So I want somebody to throw their hand up, and Dave will give you a gift card if you throw your hand up and answer. Go ahead. Insider threat, exactly. The biggest threat. Hopefully you have a gift card, because I'm putting you on the spot. In your car? Okay, we'll get you after. All right. So insider threats. Your biggest threat is on your payroll. The people that work for you. And it's not because they're malicious, for the most part, they're not malicious. They just don't know any better. They're not trained. They're willing to help. They're gullible maybe. They can be easily manipulated, and that's what happens. So phishing attacks and social engineering attacks are the number one attack vector. So we're living in different times. The attack surface is expanding beyond recognition. The types of attacks are everywhere and changing daily. Thousands of new pieces of malware and types of attacks are created on a daily and weekly basis. So in keeping up with that is difficult. And we live in the age of the mega breach. Again, you go back 10 years even, and you think about the kinds of breaches that we saw in the news. 1,000 records, 100,000 records, 1 million records was like, but now we're measuring it in hundreds of millions and billions even, Equifax and Yahoo. I remember the day that things changed, at least for me. So I'm on the other side. I'm helping organizations secure their environment, and I've been doing this forever. Before cybersecurity was even a thing, I've been doing cybersecurity, and it was steady, it was consistent, but it changed the day that Target got hit. I'm not sure who else is in the same kind of business as me, but Target, I felt a collective gasp. The entire industry went, oh! If it could happen to Target, it could happen to anybody. And so we're dealing with mega breaches. And as a matter of fact, I think that I'm gonna say something that might shock you, and it might not. I'm not sure how you're going to take this, but I think that every single person, or at least 70 to 80% of the people in this room, have their information floating around on the dark web. Whether that's PII, social security numbers, credit card information, medical records. There's been so many breaches, and you know what the dark web is, right? So there's like you can look at like an iceberg sitting in the water, and above the little 10% that's pokes through the top, that's the surface web. That's what's available that everybody can see. It's your wiki and it's your company website, maybe the public part of your social media presence. And then below that, you have the deep web, which is that part that's somewhat encrypted, protected, you require a password to get into it, maybe your email, some kind of portal, whatever. And then below that, you have the dark web, and it's fully encrypted. You can't get on there without a Tor machine, fully encrypted. Everything that you do at rest and in transit is encrypted. And that's where all kinds of nefarious activities take place. That's where drug transactions occur and all kinds of other horrible things, and that's where your data is sold. And it's like a reverse lottery, You win the lottery, and that's great, woo! But if you win that lottery, it's not so good. Because then, as a matter of fact, I got my credit card stolen a little while ago, and I'm monitored. So I was part of the... So my information, so I've been monitoring my stuff for years now. But I did some shopping for Christmas, and credit card got hacked by somebody, and I knew it because every time my credit card gets used, I get an email that says it's used. I use two-factor authentication for everything that I do. But the fact of the matter is I'm monitoring it, so I caught it, and I immediately called the credit card company and canceled it. And then a few days later, it was more like about a month later, one of the companies that I bought Christmas presents from online sent me an email saying, or a letter saying that my card had been breached. But I knew it beforehand. But the scary thing about it is that, this world, by the way, who's this guy? Warren Buffett. He agrees with everything that I'm telling you right now. He was asked, as a matter of fact, I did this research. In the audience, we have Berkshire Hathaway. Woo, Berkshire. So I had the honor and the privilege of speaking at one of their risk management events earlier this year. And in preparation, I decided to look up what Mr. Buffett has to say. He's not the most technical person in the universe, right? But he's a visionary. He sees the big picture. And he is, probably the most successful investor of our generation, if not ever. And he was asked, what's the number one threat to mankind? And this was last May during the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting. He said, what's the number one threat to mankind? And he said, cybersecurity. And the people in the room went, what? Well, what about global warming and terrorism and nuclear war and all these other things, natural disasters? What about all these things? He said, no, because cybersecurity, we're in uncharted territory, he said, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's a material risk to every part of civilization, and the fact of the matter is he's absolutely right. It's a material risk that we need to consider that we didn't have to consider 10 or 15 years ago. When you look at investing in a company, you need to understand what their risk is. What kind of cyber risk are they carrying? If you're managing a company, you need to consider cyber risk as part of your business strategy. And I'm not talking about IT necessarily. I'm talking about at the board level. Security has moved from the server room to the boardroom, or it's moving. It's in the process of moving up that chain. And if it's not part of your business strategy, you're fighting a losing battle. If you're the IT guy and everything's on your shoulders, you have no authority but all responsibility and accountability, you're losing you're fighting a losing battle. So today we're going to talk about what does it mean to align security with business? What does it mean to manage risk at levels that are in line with the business? And so that's what we're going to talk about. I think they're going to look back in a generation. 20, 30 years from now, they're going to look back and they're going to look at our society and they're going to be amazed at the tenacity and the gall and the fact that we ran our entire civilization on such a fragile and susceptible network. I'm not even joking here. I mean, the fact that we run our nuclear weapons, our military, our entire economy, our critical infrastructure, everything, our medical devices on such a fragile network. It's not a matter, we're going to have a demonstration here in a couple of minutes on how easy it is to hack in. And we do pen testing on a regular basis. And it's not a matter of can we get in. It's a matter of how quick. Sometimes it's a contest between guys, how quickly they can get in. If we do a purple team or a red teaming exercise and we can incorporate social engineering into that engagement, it's done. I mean, we're in. There's nothing you can do to stop us. So it's a crazy time that we live in. This statistic I threw up here, and by the way, I made this deck just for you guys, so hope you enjoy it. This statistic here kind of blows my mind a little bit. If you look at the actual cost of a breach, it's around $220-ish. This is a couple years old, so maybe it's a little bit higher now, per record. And you think, okay, that's not that bad, $220. Well, if you think about Target, 40 million records, and you do the math, what does that add up to? Now you're talking in the billions, north of $8 billion for notification costs, legal fees, sanctions, reputation hit, revenue hit, all these things that go into, if it was a bank, it would be game over. They would be out of business because everything is built on trust and reputation. And so some people say, well, we're a small business, we're an SMB type business. We have nothing that anybody could possibly want. So why should we worry about cybersecurity? Well, the fact of the matter is that last year, more than half of all breaches focused on SMB or small and mid-sized businesses. More than half. And a good chunk of those didn't survive. The cost for a breach on average is $7 million. If you're making $20 million, that's a lot of money. We did a project for a customer. We came in and we assessed their security, and this customer was a large organization. They're about 950 a year was their revenue number. And we told them that they needed to think about governance and policies and standards and implement things like least privilege and manage administrative access and change management, all these things that are kind of considered basic hygiene today, right? And they thought, well, we don't have anything that anybody would want, so we're not going to invest in that. That's too much work. And they just said, we're not going to worry about that. About 8 or 9 months later, they called us because what ended up happening is they had 2 engineers. They lived overseas. They employed them to run their network, and they caught them doing some questionable things, some nefarious, illegal things, and they fired them. That weekend, somebody noticed that the email they hadn't gotten an email, and the website was down. So they called IT, and they said, well, these things are down. So they checked it, and what ended up happening is somebody had logged into their network, gone to the heart of their data center, and deleted all their file servers, all their VMs, all their domain controllers, all their routers, their switches, their firewall, and everything in their DMZ, and walked out of the network and deleted everything. Everything. And so they responded, and they performed triage and got the network back up and running by about Thursday of that week. And of course, they restored everything the same way, so all the remote access, all the user accounts were still the same. And that weekend, the same thing happened. Everything was deleted from the heart of the data center out. So they scrambled again, and they started restoring stuff, and by about Tuesday, they were almost up, and they were restoring over here, and things were getting deleted over here, and then they would restore over here, and things were deleted over here, and it was this game of cat and mouse, back and forth. This company is hemorrhaging $20 million a week, and their customers can't perform business as a result of them. They lost more than half of their customers. They called us, we performed triage, locked out the people that were doing this, and I'm sure you can guess who those people were. They were the 2 engineers that they had fired because they didn't have visibility into their network to see what was going on, change management, control over administrative access. Everybody had root and SA and administrative access and domain admin privileges to everything. That's the company that didn't have anything to steal, nothing important. About a month and a half, 2 months later, they filed Chapter 11. Big company. So if that's not shocking enough, we do compromise assessments all the time. So a compromise assessment is one of those assessments where we come in and we say, have you been compromised? And if you don't know, we're going to tell you whether you have. We look for things like indicators of compromise, botnet activity. We look for command and control activity, exfiltration of data, covert channels, those kinds of things on the network. And when we ask somebody, have you been compromised or are you currently compromised? The overwhelming answer is usually no. But then the follow-up question would be what? How do you know? Yeah, exactly. How do you know? And the answer is, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Cross your fingers. Yeah, cross your fingers. Ignorance is bliss. And so the fact is, some companies answer with the right answer, which is, we have a SIM and we have user behavior analytics. We have file integrity monitoring on our critical systems. We have an IPS and we monitor traffic and we get alerts when suspicious activity occurs. And we can tell you right now that based on our reports and our alerting that nothing's happening. But most companies don't do that. And so we come in and we take a look and see. The scary statistic up here is that when you've been compromised, you don't find out that you've been compromised for between 2 and 7 months. We'll just say a half a year, so 2 and 6 months. So you have threat actors sitting on your network for the better part of half a year before you're even aware of what's going on. And we're not talking about script kiddies that we saw back in the 90s that are noisy and want to just take over and get a name for themselves. These are advanced, persistent threats. These are skilled, organized and focused individuals that want to sit on your network for as long as they can. They want to pivot. They want to move laterally. They want to exfiltrate data. They want to spy on you. And so they're not interested in being found. And so the fact is that they sit on your network for a long time, and that's a scary statistic. So we're dealing with cyber warfare. And I'm not talking about state to state necessarily. I'm just talking about a time of just warfare. We're at a battle. We're in a battle with corporate espionage, with cyber crime, with terrorists, cyber terrorists and hacktivists and people that want to take our business down. And so we need to, from a security perspective, everybody knows this, the CIA, the cybersecurity triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our critical assets, of our assets. And assets are not just our systems. There are data, there are applications, or any business processes, things that keep our business up and running. We need to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those systems. And how do we do that? Well, we need to understand what our risk is. And so my definition, this is my definition. It's not the perfect definition, but I've been in the business long enough that I've kind of carved my own definition. I'm going to read it over a couple times because I want you to really think about it for a second. So cybersecurity is people following processes and leveraging technology to implement or to achieve control objectives that reduce risk to levels that are commensurate with the business risk appetite and align with business priorities. Now that's a long sentence, probably a run-on sentence. I'm not an English major, but the fact is that it's a strategy. It's that people policy or that people processes and technology thing that we've all heard of over and over again, and it's strategic. We're implementing security objectives. If you just buy a Blinky, the latest and greatest Blinky light device, rack and stack, and you're told by the salesperson that that's the cure-all, end-all to your cybersecurity problems, I have some snake oil that I'd like to sell you, because that's not the case. Security, after all said and done, is people following processes and leveraging technology. Don't get me wrong, technology is incredibly important. It automates, and there's so much information floating around out there that we have to have visibility and we have to have that automation. But we need to have a strategy, and the strategy is to reduce risk. We need to reduce risk. You're never going to have zero risk. Would everybody agree with me on that? There's always going to be, as soon as you plug your computer into the network or connect to the internet, there's risk. The only way that you're not going to have any risk is if you unplug that machine, turn it down, put it in a safe, plant that safe in the ground, bury it, put concrete on top of it, and build a building on top of that. Then there's no risk, but then there's no business. There's always that sort of give and take and that balance between security and business functionality and efficiency. And you got to achieve that, and that's where your business, your risk appetite comes in. A bank has a lower risk appetite than, say, a construction company. So you got to figure out what that is, but you have to measure your risk. So what is risk? Well, depends on who you ask, I guess, because there's a lot of different ways to calculate risk. You have quantitative ways when you can say that this particular risk is going to cost the business exactly $147,000, and then there's a qualitative approach that says this risk is, low, medium, high, or critical, and you need to, address it based on business impact. So that criticality is always boils down to business impact. So you have your threats, those things, people. Sometimes it's people, threat actors. Sometimes it's events like a natural disaster. That's a threat that wants to take advantage of a vulnerability. And a vulnerability, you take your vulnerability and your controls that you have in place to limit the exploitability of that vulnerability, and then you have a likelihood. So if you have, we'll just say, a cross-site scripting exploit that you can take advantage of on your server, but you have a web application firewall in front of that. Okay, so that's going to filter any sort of attacks or queries or anything against that particular web server. So it kind of mitigates that attack. So it reduces the likelihood. But you have your threat, your likelihood, and then your business impact. How much of an impact would it be to the business if this was to be exploited? What would happen? What would happen to our reputation? How much money would it cost us? And that kind of thing. And that equals risk. And so what you want to do is you want to identify your risks, and then you want to treat your risks. And you have essentially 5 different things you can do to risk. You can remediate the risk. That means essentially that you try and fix the vulnerability, or you get rid of reduce it as much as you can by fixing the weakness or limiting the threat or reducing the business impact. You can mitigate it. So you can put controls around it. So for example, if you have a legacy system that you should really be encrypting the communication to, but you can't because it's old and there's no more upgrades. So maybe what you do is you VLAN that off and you limit who has access to that box, and only one machine has access, and that's a jump station that everybody then VPNs into or two-factor authentications into or encrypts the traffic to that box, and that box is the only one that could administer or connect with that legacy system. So that would mitigate the risk associated with that system. And of course, you can. Today, it's popular too. We do incident response for companies on a regular basis that have cyber insurance. So transferring the risk is a popular thing nowadays. But if you've ever worked with an insurance company, you know that's not the cure-all to cybersecurity. It might lessen the impact. It might make you feel a little bit better as far as your bank book's concerned, but it is a headache, and it's not going to solve all your problems. But you can transfer the risk to somebody else. By the way, you can't transfer risk to a cloud provider. I have this conversation all the time. You can transfer some responsibility, but the risk is still yours. If it's your data and it's out in the cloud, and I guess it depends on the level of cloud. So if you got infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, the higher you go up that ladder, the less responsibility you have for managing and maintaining that. But if that gets hacked, it's still your data. It's still your head on the platter, and it's still your responsibility, and you're still accountable for it. So there's a misunderstanding about that. But so you can transfer, you can eliminate. What does that mean? That means just to get rid of whatever's causing the threat or whatever's causing the vulnerability or the likelihood or the business impacts. If you remove the data, if you remove the system, decommission the system, that eliminates it. Or you can accept. And an overwhelming number of risks are just accepted. We don't have an infinite amount of resources and money and people to throw at this problem. So we have to decide, we have to prioritize. That's why it has to be associated with business impact, because when you look at your risk, you're not going to be able to do everything. Some of the stuff's just the cost of doing business. So some of the mediums and lows, you're just going to say, I'm just going to live with that, and we're going to take our chances. Just like when you invest, when you manage a business and you look at other forms of risk, financial risk, strategic risk, operational risk, these kinds of things, you're never going to have zero risk when it comes to investing your money or managing a business like that. Same thing with cybersecurity type risk. So certain things are just the cost of doing business, but the high ones, the critical ones, the ones that could take your business down and could cause a major disruption, these are the ones you want to treat. So we can treat a couple different areas. We can treat the threat. We can limit the effectiveness or the desire of a threat to take advantage of that particular whatever it is, vulnerability. We can look at the likelihood. We can remediate and mitigate the vulnerability itself and reduce the likelihood there. And we could also take a look at the impact itself and reduce that. So we could encrypt the data, for example. So if your data gets compromised, it's really unusable to the threat actor, whoever takes it. So how do we develop a strategy? So like I said, it's not about just technology. You need to start from the beginning and understand your business. And so we need to do an assessment. You need to assess your business from every angle. I don't know if you guys can read that from there, but essentially it says everything that your business is about from a technology and a governance and a compliance perspective, you need to assess your risk in those areas. So from an external, your internet-facing systems, you need to assess those. What risks exist there? Your internal systems, your servers, workstations, and mobile devices, your infrastructure, your remote access, your wireless, your web applications, your physical security, your social engineering and security awareness posture. The governance, the policies, procedures, and processes that you manage your business around or through. And compliance is part of that. It has to be rolled into that assessment. Compliance, some people say compliance is another risk, and it's debatable, it's arguable, but there are certain compliance requirements that aren't negotiable. As a matter of fact, HIPAA, because of the omnibus and various other additions to HIPAA, if you claim to be HIPAA compliant and you're not, and you get breached, you could not only have government issues and civil liability, but you could also have criminal liability issues to deal with. There's people that have actually gone to jail or been charged because of HIPAA violations. You go back 10 years ago, and HIPAA was the toothless lion. Nobody cared about it because nobody could do anything. And then the government offered some money and said, here, I'll give you some money if you actually put HIPAA in place. And everybody was like, oh, money, I like money. And so they went and they started implementing these controls. And then they said, oh, by the way, if you lie about it, you're going to jail. And everybody kind of woke up and went, oh, that's not good. There's physical security. You can't jeopardize the safety of people. These compliance requirements are mandatory in some cases. You need to include that, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, whatever. And then when you develop the strategy, what do we get? Here's our risk register. Here's the list of risks that we're dealing with. You may want to address the ones that are affecting your most critical assets. You may want to address those first, and then the rest of them maybe just the criticals and highs. Whatever that strategy looks like to your business, it's going to fit your business. Then you develop that strategy. You put that in place. You put the controls in place. You develop the processes. You develop the programs, and then you go ahead and carry it out. Then you want to retest. You want to make sure that what you're doing is actually effective, that you're having the impact and the change that you want to. And of course, policies. This is the glue, in my opinion, that holds the network together. Policies and the processes, and we're getting to the point now where companies are realizing this. I still come across probably half the companies we deal with that don't have policies, don't have processes. There's no consistency across the network. It's that buffer that ensures that reduces the impact, because you ensure that everything is done to a certain standard, that your systems are hardened and deployed properly, they're monitored properly, that you have the ability, because it's not about if you get hacked. I guarantee every single company represented here will get hacked at some point. It's a matter of, will you see that happening in real time? Do you have the visibility into your network to see that? And do you have the maturity in your incident response capability to actually respond to that, to effectively mitigate that before it becomes a breach, before it becomes a business impacting event? That's the question. So I can really turn this on its head if we're talking about importance, policies and processes and standards could be the foundational part. But in order to get there, you need to assess. And so you need to have your policies. And then programs. Programs is a very vague word, and I realize that. But essentially, it's everything from a complete framework alignment like ISO 27001 to programs like disaster recovery and business continuity, incident response. If you really want to have a robust business with a high degree of certainty that you're going to be around next year and you're going to thrive, security can be a differentiator. It can be a competitive advantage, and that's what it's evolving into. It's changing. It's no longer the ugly stepchild of the IT family. It's actually becoming an advantage, a competitive advantage for companies. So having those programs in place will ensure that your business has security. So the cyber kill chain. Anybody heard of this? Got a couple nodding. Really, nobody? Okay, so I bring this up because, first of all, it's a cool phrase, cyber kill chain. Come on, that is pretty catchy. But it's beyond that. There's something interesting about attack pathways, and this is just one of many attack pathways. And I use this as Lockheed Martin's version of a hack, basically. Any ethical hackers in the room? So we got one, just one. Okay, I'll put my hand up. I'm actually a hacker. I used to do it for years. Haven't done it for a while, but I love hacking. And when you go and you take any sort of hacking course, they teach you about this sort of process, the reconnaissance and then the fingerprinting and footprinting of the systems and inventorying of vulnerabilities and a selection of high-value targets and choosing of your attack vectors. And you go in and you actually exploit those systems. And you get a foothold. You create covert channels. You erase your tracks. So there's a few different ways to look at attack pathways, and this is one of them. And the reason I bring it up is because when you're treating risk, you got to say, okay, what are my control objectives and how do I achieve those? Well, you can achieve them through addressing the threat. And this would be an example of a threat. And you can put controls at each one of those stages. You could do what's called threat modeling. Anybody familiar with threat modeling? So you basically do a profile of what are your threats, how would they exploit vulnerabilities in your environment, whether that's internal threats, natural disasters, threat actors, whatever, and you identify those threats and how they would attack you. You inventory it, and then you put controls in place to stop it, to mitigate it, to reduce the likelihood that they would ever do anything. So in the recon level, you would be cognizant of what information is out there. You would maybe monitor the dark web. Maybe you would put maybe controls in place, so watches for people scanning your networks and looking up information about you. As far as the delivery and exploitation, you might want to patch your systems and monitor your systems, have IPS in place and various other controls. So each one of these levels, you can put controls in place. Kind of reminds me of a project I did years ago. This is, oh man, so probably 7-8 years ago. It's before I actually took over and became the director for the previous company that I worked for. And it was a super large, like one of the top 10 law firms in the world. Have locations all over the United States, all over the world, and they just invested a whole bunch of money in like millions and millions of dollars in physical security and various other controls. And the goal for us was to physically penetrate. They give us 5 locations in the States. We had to physically penetrate at least a couple of them, and then exfiltrate data after being on site. So, and when you came to these buildings in New York and DC and Atlanta, you have to come to the security desk. You can't get past that. They have secure elevators that take you to a secured floor that you have to be escorted to, and then they may own a few floors on there. And so you can't even get into the building without having a badge of some sort. So that was our task. And you would think that all these controls would be impossible to do. So step one. So we did some recon. So this company had a law firm lists all the people that work for them, every single person, even interns and brand new lawyers and so on, even the secretaries listed. And so I went and did a bunch of recon, and I got some targets that I wanted to, to make victims, if you will. And so I sent them an email spoofing to be, maybe I shouldn't say that, but anyway, so it was not anybody else. So I spoofed an email saying, we're going to be coming on site and we're going to be doing an audit, and I want you to install, this little piece of software, and it'll allow us to have visibility into your machine, make sure it's compliant, blah, blah, blah. And so of the, I think it was like maybe 25 or 30 people, half a dozen of them clicked on it, installed it on their machine, and I had a little listener, so it would actually do a reverse shell on port 4444, or 4444, and come back to my machine. And so I just sat there, I sent out an email blast, and I sat there and just boom, 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 shell access to each one of these machines. And from there, I started looking around. Because I wasn't going to exfiltrate data at that point, because that would be cheating. The goal was to get on site, but I'm doing recon at this point. And so, so I noticed something interesting, is that their username, when I went into their actual profile, the username was not first initial, last name. It was some kind of string of numbers and characters. I figure it was maybe an employee number or something like that. So I got that, and I selected a target. It was a new lawyer, and we'll just call him Brian. And Brian worked in New York, and I was going to attack in Atlanta. So I called New York and I said, can you transfer me down to Atlanta? So they transferred me down to Atlanta. So the call display in Atlanta would look like it was coming from New York, where Brian worked. And I said, listen, I'm coming down to Atlanta tomorrow, and I have a client that's going to meet me at 2:30. I need to reserve a conference room, blah, blah, blah. And so they just set up a conference room, and we were good to go. So the next day, I had fake ID for myself, and I was the client, and I called the office and said, listen, my plane landed late. I'm going to be about 30 minutes late. My client's going to be there. Can you please just make sure, take care of him, set him up in the conference room, and make sure he's taken care of. So then I show up as the client, a little bit pissy because my lawyer's not there at $400 an hour. Come on. So they oblige me and they take me back. I check in at the security escorts me to the secure floor. They take me back to a conference room, and they allow me to sit down. They bring this butler-looking guy kind of walks in with this tray of coffee and sodas and snacks, and all. They were just treating me like royalty. And so after he left, I went to where the TV was. I opened up the cabinet underneath. There was a hub in there, or a switch, or whatever, plugged into that. And then I called the front desk and said, what's the IT number? And they gave me the IT number. I called the IT number, and now I'm Brian again. And I said, I forgot my password. I just came down to Atlanta. I'm doing a presentation. I can't log into my email. I can't download my presentation. I made a big stink, and the guy in the help desk said, what's your user account? which would have been a game stopper had I not done reconnaissance. But I had that information. I gave that to him. They changed the password. I logged into his account, mapped all of his drives. Whatever he had permissions to do, I did. Downloaded a bunch of stuff, and then I left the building. And I decided that rather than go back up and pass the receptionist again, I would just sneak out and go out the fire escape and maybe go down a floor where it wasn't secure and take the elevator from there. So I put my camel fur jacket and my 30-pound bag on, and I hop out at the 42nd floor. It set off an alarm, by the way, and didn't realize that you can't get in any of those doors, so you're done. So I had to go all the way down 44 or 42 floors, and if you ever walked down, you think it would be easy to go down. It's actually really hard. My calves were shaking. I couldn't walk for a week afterwards. But anyway, I get out, and the security people are there waiting for me because I set off an alarm, and I had my story straight, told them what happened, and they let me go. That's how easy it is. And so they could have done some things at any one of these levels. They could have verified who I was when I was reserving a conference room. They could have, I had ID, but they could have checked my ID. They could have, done a number of other things as far as when I called to change my password, verify who I was. They thought that, security through obscurity, the fact that there's no way I would know that user account was that string. Well, that was easy to find out. So these are the kinds of things that you need to think about. I think I turned myself off here, talking too much. Let me see. All right, so layered security. Everybody familiar with security in depth, layered security? Come on, guys, let's wake up. Hand, yeah, everybody's good? All right, so security is not, you need to remove that single point of failure, that what we call the critical path. If all you have is a firewall, so back in the 90s, we had a firewall and antivirus, and that was kind of, that's all we really needed. And what I call that is being hard and crunchy on the outside and soft and chewy on the inside. And if I can get past that hard and crunchy, you're done. And so nowadays, we need to be hard and crunchy at layers all the way through, almost that, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll thingamajig, right? Yeah, well, we need to be multiple layers to get to the heart of our data center, to the critical assets that we have. And so we have to have security at multiple layers. And you can look at your network in this way. You can look at it as the perimeter and the network and the endpoints and the applications and the data and the critical assets. You can look at it in layers and say, okay, well, I'm going to have a control at each layer. I don't think that's good enough. I think you need to have multiple controls at each layer. And not just technical controls. Keep in mind, security is technical, but it's also administrative and organizational, procedural. We need to have, like on the outside, for example, you might have a firewall. You might have an IPS. You might have a SIM in place that monitors that and sees that scanning activity and things like that. And then you might have an incident response capability. And so you see activity, you alert, you actually declare an incident. You then respond, on the network layer, you might have network segmentation, a NAC. You might have patching and administrative identity and access management processes in place. And all the way down to your critical assets. You have multiple layers at each layer in your network. Okay. So my final point, and I don't know how long I've been talking. Anybody have a time? 9, what time? 9:23. 23, okay, so I'm on time. So I have one more point to make, and that's this, is that we pull this all together. We've got security being people and processes and leveraging technology to implement security objectives that reduce risk and align with business priorities. So we have these programs, we have these intersecting aspects of security, and security is the most overwhelming field to be in. How many security people in the room? So we have almost half, I guess. There's something called, I was reading an article the other day called CISO burnout. Anybody heard of that? CISO burnout? Yeah, I mean, it's a real thing. And what makes it even worse is that when you're a CISO and you have all the responsibility and accountability but no authority, it makes it almost impossible for you to do your job. So these people are burning out because security encapsulates and it covers everything, every aspect of a business, from the governance and the policies to the telephony systems and the physical security, the training of people. All these areas are covered. And so we have these big, huge circles, everything from your threat management to risk management to the operations side of security. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that you need to be strategic about it. And then and when you get that in place, when you have your programs developed, when you have your policies, when you have your processes, and you have all your risks identified and your strategy for addressing those, that's just the beginning. It continues over and over. It's continuously improving process. If you take a look at CMMI, you guys familiar with CMMI? Carnegie Mellon's capability maturity matrix? No? Yeah? Okay, so you've got 5 different levels of maturity. So 1 being you have nothing in place, you're just ad hoc. And if you go to 2, it's repeatable, meaning that you have processes, maybe they're not documented, but you kind of do things in a fairly consistent way. 3 being that you have documented, you've defined these processes and these policies, all the way up to number 5, which is kind of self-improving almost. You want to be continually heading towards something that's a good balance. And sometimes that level 5 is too much for a business to manage. And you may not want to be there. Maybe you want to be a 3. But the point is that you need to mature as an organization and evaluate your security every single year, because guess what? Technology changes. The threats change. The risks change. Your business changes. It grows. The market changes. Everything changes. So your security program needs to keep in step with those changes. So it's it's a continuously improving process. So with that, let me just sum things up, and I kind of did just now. Security is not just technology. It's people, it's processes, it's technology, and we're managing risk. We're managing our threats, and we're continually improving these things over time. It needs to align with business. If your security program doesn't align with your business priorities, you're missing the mark, because you're not there to just be an island unto yourself. You're there to improve, to enhance, to enable the business. It needs to align with the business. There's an awareness that people are, the industry, the world in general is starting to realize this. And like I said, the security is moving from the server room to the boardroom, but we need technical representation at the board level. Every time I present to a board and talk to people in a board setting, there's very rarely a technical person present. I don't know if you guys find the same thing or not. As a matter of fact, funny story. So I'm presenting to this board, the big insurance company, and I'm talking about certain things and about their risks and the project that we just did. And we get on the topic of two-factor authentication, and so they're talking about two-factor, and I said, SMS is not the best because it can be hacked, but it is the most convenient because it goes to a cell phone and everybody has a cell phone. So if you want to strike that balance, we started getting on the conversation about striking the balance between business and security, and I said, going to your cell phone is probably a good idea. So your two-factor code should go to your phone. And a lady there, and she was a doctor, and she goes, that's good because that's where we write down all of our passwords, right? And I just burst out laughing. Nobody else was laughing, just me. So I stopped and I went, were you joking? And she goes, no, I was serious. And then the whole room erupted because the irony of that comment is what I'm trying to drive home. We need to drive security down from the board level into the operational side of things, and we need to have somebody upstairs, somebody in that boardroom that knows what they're talking about. So with that, let me say if there's any questions, I'd be willing to do that. I'll be around for the entire morning, actually. So if you have any questions that you don't want to ask publicly, you can take me aside. Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So in this whole risk management arena, I think there's a question about money to be spent by organizations. Do you have any thoughts on how to help beyond, hey, here's all the things that could happen to you that are bad, but do you have any kind of justification approaches that can help us approach our management on boards?
So that's a very good question, by the way. Let me preface that with when you select a control, your control should never cost more than the risk that you're mitigating or remediating. So if you have a risk that, say, would cost you $100,000, your control should not be a $500,000 solution because it just doesn't make business sense. Now, with that being said, even though we're doing, for the most part, for efficiency's sake, we're doing qualitative sort of risk analysis, each category has a value associated with it. So when you see a risk, you should know that if it falls into the critical level, it's going to be whatever your measurement happens to be. It might be 500,000, might be a million, might be whatever. But a risk assessment is what you can use to basically, I wouldn't say scare, but to get the business to take notice of the needs that are present in your company and open up the purse strings a little bit and get a budget. The budget should address the risk specifically. So if you have a risk assessment done, whether you do it internally or you have somebody come in and do it, you need to then develop control objectives. And those control objectives will usually be correspond with controls that you put in place, whether that's policies, whether that's processes, whether that's technology of some sort. And there's a price tag that goes along with those technologies and those administrative and organizational efforts for that matter. So you can create a budget based on that, but it starts with risk because that really kind of drives it home. What I will say on the other side is that businesses usually, when they give you a budget, they want to see the return on investment. And as you go up that CMMI scale, you start measuring things, metrics. You start taking metrics. You start looking at things like reduction in the number of virus outbreaks, or reduction in the number of phishing emails that are clicked on. Those kinds of things, number of critical patches that are outstanding in your environment, that kind of thing. So you can actually measure those things and send that back. So it's a two-way thing. You need to present your budget. It needs to be thought out with respect to control objectives, not just the hard cost, but the soft cost, and the total cost of ownership for those devices as well. So you buy things. It's not just a one-time cost. You have maintenance costs that are going to follow that technology along for years to come. So you got to incorporate those, and usually every year your budget will increase by 20% for new investment, but you have to also be able to provide evidence of that return on investment, if you will. That was a good question. Any other questions?
That just seems hard to quantify. Because you tell your management, well, we haven't hacked it. We have all these things in place, but that is hard to quantify.
Yeah, it is. But it's not about being hacked. What you don't want to do is you don't want to respond once you've been hacked. You want to present the risk of this is the chances of us getting hacked, and here's how we reduce that to a level that's acceptable. I agree. It's a challenging argument because it costs money, and it's almost like buying insurance. Do I really get anything for that? It's hard to make that argument, and that sort of return on investment, that upfront sort of here's the calculation of what you're going to get back, it's kind of abstract to a certain degree. So it is a tough argument. But what I will say is that there's been a significant shift, and the more mature the organization, the bigger organizations. As a matter of fact, 5-6 years ago, how many CISOs did you see out there? How many leaders? Zero, exactly. Almost every major company has a CISO or a VP of information security or somebody that leads the security effort and oversees that. So we're seeing this shift, and in the next 5 years it's going to explode because we're going to have some. If you think that Equifax and Yahoo and all these big breaches were impressive, you wait till somebody takes control of a plane and crashes it, or a car and drives it into a building or through a crowd. We're going to have autonomous vehicles driving everywhere, and chatbots that we're going to talk to. And we're annoyed by auto attendants right now, but we're going to talk to chatbots. We're not going to know that they're even chatbots. They're going to have personalities and stories and families, and they're going to have a rough day. We're going to talk to them. They're going to have emotional intelligence. These things are coming within the next 5 years. Go ahead.
I think the comment about that we haven't had a breach yet is a very fair thing that you're going to hear from organizations, but that kind of points to the a comment of DK squared. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So, okay, we don't know. Why don't we do a little bit of investigating as to what we don't know in our environment and start from there in terms of being able to build the risk thing. So it kind of points to doing a risk assessment, doing a vulnerability assessment. Let's figure out what we don't know in our organization. And then we can go and attack intelligently that we haven't been reached yet from executive management's perspective. Right, they haven't been. Why do we spend? Let's go figure out what we don't know first.
I agree. So the question was, we should go figure out what we don't know and show that to management. Another good way is to actually have pen testing as part of your risk assessment. Because if we pen test and we hack in and we get the CEO's social security number, his banking information, and we show that we could have actually wired money by overriding an administrator's workstation and wiring money from one bank to another, that wakes people up too. And as a matter of fact, social engineering, dealing with wiring of funds, is a huge thing right now. And I bet there's people represented here that have gone through that already. So, go ahead.
I think part of the problem in demonstrating this in the SMB play, is that
right, so more data presented about what really happens to real SMBs, like these folks really did tell and they said, what cost them.
Yeah.
That would really help them.
Well, there was one stat I put up there that said the average cost in the United States for a breach is $7 million. So you can take that back, and that's a real stat. And so a lot of small and mid-sized businesses can't afford $1 million, let alone $7 million. If you look at GDPR, where the fine is actually 4% of turnover, which is your top line revenue essentially, most companies, like you look at, we'll just take a look at, I'm not going to use a name again because I have to get this Sean to bleep out what I used earlier, but a large retailer might make 4% net profit. If you get a GDPR fine, that wipes out your entire net profit. You've made nothing that year essentially. So there's a real value, there's a cost associated with all these risks that we're talking about. It's a real thing that companies have to wake up and realize that it's the cost of doing business to secure yourself. If you're not going to secure yourself, you're not going to compete in 5 and 10 years. You're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. So if there's any other questions, I'd be willing to take them at this point. Otherwise, we can have an early break and grab some food and coffee.
I just saw in the news that a managed service provider for an IT, or they are an IT service provider, now they are the targets, they're getting hacked, so that their customers, they have the keys to the Keynote, and they can go down all these other small businesses and start hacking small businesses. Lead for that. Another one I have is, I've read that the cyber insurance companies are now targets because they know where the money is, businesses have to be insured in order to hack their business.
Very good. So the statement was really about who we do business with, and the fact that they're targeting threat actors and malicious actors are targeting those businesses to get at your business. There's an attack called the watering hole. Anybody heard of a watering hole attack? Where they target a business that you do business with because you go there and you trust them. So the big one that I mentioned earlier, Target, that it was an HVAC company that actually they hacked, and we used their access to get in and hack their point of sale systems. But there's something called vendor risk management. I wouldn't say it's new, but the popularity has gone through the roof in the last little while. So you're probably, if you're doing business with anybody else, you're probably getting these questionnaires that say describe your security so that we can know that you're secure. And having a vendor risk management program in place is important because you need to understand what your supply chain is. You need to understand the risks associated with those that you're doing business with, because their risk is your risk, especially if they're handling your data or have access to your network. So I appreciate the questions. Any other questions before we wrap it up? We all good? All right. Well, let me end by saying thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys your attention and for showing up and for taking security seriously. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.